Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode on Introduction to World Religions. Today, we'll continue with Judaism and we'll take a look at the importance that the prophets hold in Judaism as well as some of the important Jewish festivals. So, we see that in Judaism, prophets, festivals, and prayers play a significant role in shaping the religious life and also guiding the moral conduct of the Jewish people. So, when we speak about prophets, we see that the term prophet basically refers to one who speaks for God. And in this way, we see that the prophet is a kind of a bridge between God and the people. So, prophets are central figures in Judaism as they deliver divine messages, they guide the people, and also they challenge the injustices that are there within society. So, when we speak about prophets, we see that Moses is regarded as the greatest and the most authentic prophet in Judaism. Now, he's seen as a kind of a direct spokesman of God, and in a way he's known for delivering the Torah and guiding the Israelites out of Egypt, especially during the Exodus. Now, Moses' teachings and leadership form the foundation of Jewish law and tradition. Then you also have other major prophets that include Elijah, Elisha, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. We see that these prophets acted as God's messengers, and in a way, we see that they delivered both messages of warnings as well as guidance to the people. And this was especially when the people were straying away from the covenant. So, when the people went away from the covenant, they either warned the people or they guided the people to come back. And they were also known for their strong opposition to social injustices. And whenever people violated the Torah, they also strongly opposed that. So, other prophets include Jeremiah, who warned the people of the impending exile due to their disobedience. And then you also have Ezekiel, who emphasized the importance of individual responsibility before God. Now, Ezekiel also had visions of the restoration of Israel. Now, the role of the prophet we see was to challenge the power of the kings, especially when they acted unjustly. For instance, prophets would correct the actions of the king. And in this way, when the kings allowed for oppression, exploitation, or violations of the law to go unchecked, we see that the prophets would intervene and correct the actions of the king. Now, Elijah famously confronted King Ahab and Queen Jezebel for their injustice, particularly in the case of Naboth's vineyard. Next, we also see that the prophets had a revolutionary approach to social issues. So, we see that they did not tolerate oppression, exploitation, or inequality. So, when the people, particularly the rich, accumulated wealth unjustly, the prophets would speak out against such actions. And their whole mission, we see, was to restore justice, correct wrongs, and realign the society with the ethical demands of the Torah. Now we take a look at the role of Jerusalem and the temple. Now we see that under King David, Jerusalem becomes the political and religious capital of Israel. Now, David's decision to establish the city of Jerusalem as the heart of the Israelite nation, in a way, had a profound impact on the development of Jewish faith. Why? Because we see that Jerusalem here becomes a central site for worship, prayer, and the gathering of Jewish people. Then we also see that King Solomon, that is David's son, built the first temple in Jerusalem. And now we see that Jerusalem also becomes a kind of a religious center for the Israelites. Now, the temple also housed the Ark of the Covenant, and it was also a site for sacrifices and important rituals. And therefore, the temple was the most sacred space in ancient Israel, and its destruction in 586 BCE by the Babylonians marked a significant turning point in Jewish history. So, we now take a look at Jewish festivals. Now we see that Jewish festivals are in a way deeply rooted in religious history and tradition. And in this way, we see that they commemorate significant events. They also celebrate the covenantal relationship between God and the Jewish people. And therefore, these festivals are not only times of remembrance, but they are also opportunities for reflection, community gathering, and spiritual renewal. So, now let's take a look at some of the major Jewish festivals. So, first you have the Passover or the Pesach, that is on the 14th day of the first month of Nisan. Now, we see that the Passover celebrates God's deliverance of the Hebrews from slavery in Egypt, and it marks the night when the angel of death passed over the houses of the Israelites, sparing their firstborn sons during the 10th plague. Now, what are the rituals during this time? So, Jews partake in the Seder meal, which includes unleavened bread, bitter herbs, and other symbolic foods. Now, this is done while the story of the Exodus is recited, from the Haggadah. And therefore, the festival highlights themes of freedom and divine salvation. Next, you have the feast of the unleavened bread. And therefore, this is one which follows the Passover. So, it is from the 15th to the 21st of Nisan. Now, this festival commemorates the haste with which the Israelites left Egypt, and they did not have time to allow the bread to rise. So, this in a way is a reminder of God's swift intervention to free his people. And what are the rituals? So we see that for 7 days, Jews eat unleavened bread, and the consumption of leavened products is forbidden. Now, traditionally, during this festival, Jews would make the first of the three pilgrimages to Jerusalem. Next, you have the feast of the first fruits. Now, this is celebrated on the first Sunday after Nisan 15th. Now, this feast in a way marks the beginning of the barley harvest, and it involves the offering of the first harvested barley to God. And this basically in a way symbolizes gratitude to God for the provision of sustenance. So for the all the blessings that I receive for the good crop, it is a kind of a gratitude to God. And what are the rituals? We see that the first sheaf of the barley harvest is waved by the priest in the temple as an offering to God. So this basically recognizes the fact that God is the provider of all things. Next, you have the Feast of Weeks, also called as the Pentecost or Shavuot. Now, this is 50 days after the first Sabbath following Passover. Now, it is also known as Shavuot, and this festival celebrates the giving of the Torah to the Israelites at Mount Sinai. So, it is one of the three pilgrimage festivals, and historically we see that the Jews would bring offerings of the first fruits to the temple. Now, what are the rituals? We see that the Jews make the second of the three annual pilgrimages to Jerusalem. And Shavuot is also associated with reading of the book of Ruth, which highlights the themes of loyalty, harvest, and the giving of the law. Then you have the Feast of the Trumpets, also called as Rosh Hashanah. So, this is on the first day of the seventh month, that is Tishri, and Rosh Hashanah marks the Jewish New Year, and it also marks the beginning of the 10 days of repentance that leads up to Yom Kippur. So it's basically a time of reflection, self examination, and renewal. Now, what are the rituals? We see that there are special trumpet blasts, typically using a shofar, that is a ram's horn, and this is used to announce the holiday. So, prayers are also recited, seeking forgiveness and blessings for the coming year. Then you have the Day of Atonement, that is Yom Kippur. Now, this is on the 10th day of the 7th month, that is Tishri. So, Yom Kippur is the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, and it is focused on atonement and reconciliation with God. So, it's generally a day of fasting, prayer, and repentance for all the sins that are committed during the past year. Now, what are the rituals? We see that the high priest makes a special offering to atone for the sins of Israel. The Jews also fast for 25 hours and they attend synagogue services, seeking forgiveness from God and also reflecting on personal behavior. Then you have the Feast of the Tabernacles, also known as Sukkot. This is from the 15th to the 22nd of the 7th month, that is Tishri. And this in a way commemorates the 40 years the Israelites spent wandering in the desert after their exodus from Egypt. It also marks the beginning of the new agricultural year. Now, when we look at the rituals, we see that the Jews build and dwell in temporary shelters called sukkahs, and this represents the fragile dwellings that their ancestors lived during their journey through the desert. And it is said that the third pilgrimage to Jerusalem is traditionally made during this period. Next, we have the feast of the dedication, that is Hanukkah, and this was instituted in the year 164 BCE, and it is celebrated for 8 days starting on the 25th of Kislev. Now, Hanukkah commemorates the rededication of the second temple in Jerusalem after it was desecrated by the Seleucid king Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, the miracle of Hanukkah centers on a small amount of oil that miraculously kept the temple menorahs lit for 8 days. So, in the temple menorah, that is what we see over here, in those days they used to use oil, and we see that a small amount of oil was there which kept the menorah lit for 8 days. Now, the festival is celebrated by lighting the menorah, the candelabrum, for 8 consecutive nights. Also, you play games like dreidel and eat foods fried in oil, such as latkes, that is potato pancakes, what can be seen in the picture here. Next, you also have the festival of Purim or the feast of Purim, which is from the 14th and the 15th of the 12th month, that is Adar. And this basically commemorates the events in the book of Esther. So we see that Jews celebrates these feast by reading the Megillah, that is the book of Esther. They also give gifts. They also give gifts to their friends and make offerings to the poor, and also they enjoy festive meals. So in a way, we see that it is a joyous festival that is marked by costumes, feasting, as well as parties. Now, we see that according to Judaism, humans are created in the image of God, and therefore this gives them a unique role in creation. So, unlike other faiths that might emphasize original sin, Judaism does not teach that humanity is born inherently sinful. Instead, humans have free will to choose between good and evil. So, sin in Judaism is understood as the transgression of God's commandments, but there is always the possibility of repentance and returning to a state of purity. Now, God is described as a compassionate, forgiving person who forgives the iniquities, and also, in a way, who gives blessings and is always merciful. Now, the sacrificial services in ancient times that were held were meant for purification, particularly in the temple where offerings were made for atonement. So, when we speak about prayers, we see that the Jewish prayer book that is called as Siddur contains a collection of prayers that are recited daily, as well as the recited on the Sabbath and also during festival days. Now, the prayers in the Siddur we see are expressions of Jewish faith, and they also reflect the ethical and spiritual values of Judaism. Now let's take a look at the type of prayers that are there. So you have first and foremost the Shema, one of the most important prayers in Judaism. The Shema, in a way, affirms the central tenet of monotheism. That is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, which we find in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. And this prayer is recited daily, and it emphasizes unity with God. Next is the Amida, which is also known as the standing prayer. Amida is recited 3 times a day, and it consists of praises, request, and thanks to God. We see that on holidays as well as on some special occasions, it is lengthened to include specific petitions. Then you also have the Kaddish, that is a prayer of sanctification that expresses hope for the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. And therefore we see that the Kaddish is also recited by mourners during the mourning period. Then you also have the circumcision, which is an important religious practice that symbolizes the covenant between God and the Jewish people. And this is particularly performed on the 8th day of a male child's life, which signifies the child's entry into the covenant community. So this is all for today's episode. Next time we'll take a look at Jewish ethics and what are some of the concepts of life and death in Judaism. So thank you and see you next time.